think like the thing about pleasure is we can have conversations around it. We cannot educate people because it's such a personal journey, right? Pleasure for me might not look the same as you. Again, our identities also play a huge role in how we define pleasure, how we experience pleasure. For example, for, again, asexual community ko lagi, pleasure will be very different from how pleasure is for me. So one thing that we really do with our workshops is, and oily say we've just been focusing on, for workshops specifically, say vulva owners ko lagi matter gara chha haina. But in terms of discussions that we have, because again, for me who advocates for pleasure, I come from like a cis woman perspective, right? So त्यो भएको कारणले चाहिँ there's a lot of perspective that I wouldn't know. So for trans people, how does that look like? So हाम्रो main thing that we really do is like have group discussions. So for a trans person, how does your relationship with your body is? How do you communicate that with your partners? How does sex look like for you? For example, in queer relationships, in a queer relationship, basically, how do you define pleasure? And I think it's really important, and I think we talked about this as well, like how we say a foreplay baneko, like so and sex is penetration, right? How does sex look like in a queer relationship? In same-sex relationship, how does sex look like? Right? Because the thing is, we've been handed this script about sex ki. Yस्तै गर्नुपर्छ, यस्तै गर्यो भने राम्रो हुन्छ, and this is how you should do it. But again, it's very political because that then caters to the dominant group, cis-het men, cis people, right? Ani queer folks khoi kaha cha the conversation haina. So again, I really don't like the term foreplay ke? Because what is foreplay? What foreplay might mean to you is sex for me with my partner, and that's as valid as your penis and vagina sexual activity that you do, right? So I think one thing that's really important to talk about pleasure, and I'm in the process of it as well, I'm not an expert. I've just been part of many conversations, have facilitated these conversations. But it's so important to understand how pleasure looks like for intersex folks, how pleasure looks like for trans community, trans women, trans men, non-binary folks. How does it look like for a broader community? But also, how can we ensure that our narrative all around pleasure is also very able-body-centric? Okay? So for disabled folks, how does pleasure look like for you, right? So just expanding that narrative of pleasure. Okay? How can we make pleasure trauma-informed so that, because like sexual assault survivors, the way you experience pleasure can be very different. So how do we challenge that script that we have given? Okay? So our main aim with our project has been redefining what pleasure means. And it's just creating that our own narratives, our own scripts with ourselves, but also if we want to share it with others, partners. So I think it's mostly keeping that conversation going and ensuring that sometimes whenever you facilitate a conversation, you come from your own social positionings. So you can be an active listener than just भन्नलाई सिकाउनलाई, because आफ्नै त मेरो सिकाउने कुरा त मेरो एक्सपिरियन्सबाट आउँछ नि त. सो त्यो एक्सपिरियन्सलाई कसरी हामीले ब्रोडन गर्न सक्छौं is something that's really important, especially when you work in something as subjective as pleasure. Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing I want to add in this context, but when I was listening to you, a lot of times I feel like, I'm so marginalized when it comes to representation. अब यो sexual representation को हिसाबले पनि, sexuality को representation को हिसाबले पनि, हैन? But I still feel like right now I'm sitting in a couch and I'm having this conversation so openly that I have this privilege of sitting and talking about this. I know. I am a Chaudhary, I am a Tharu, I come from Tarai, अनि म धेरै जान्छु उता, अनि म एकदम relate गर्छु मेरो rootsसँग, and I sit and think about women there. Just in general. And it just happened to me right now while I was listening to you. I can listen to this and maybe I can say, okay, I am in my own journey of pleasure. But I know back there, they don't have this.
I think we have this idea that these other women don't have this, but I think it's just that the language, the way pleasure is seen is different.